Okay. I'd like to welcome everybody. I'll go through a whole lot of information about feedstocks, about, as it relates to compost and compost production, and what the quality of all of that material is. There are all kinds of feedstocks, and we color code our feedstocks for browns and greens, carbons and nitrogens, wet and dry. Okay, so we always have those color coded when we're talking about them in terms of putting them together to make a good balance of a compost. So food waste, food processing waste, manure, it's got carbon and nitrogen in it. Everything really has carbon and nitrogen in it, but some has more, so we've put the primary color. Weeds, generally a lot of nitrogen. Garden residuals, half and half. Leaves, when they're really dry, are going to be more of a carbon. And brown, they've lost a lot of that material. When we wet them, then that nitrogen is still there, but when they're dry, they act as a brown or a carbon material. Yard waste, same way. Pond weeds are pretty liquid. So we do harvest water chestnut and loosestrife and different plants that are invasives generally. And when we bring them up on land where there isn't a lot of water, then we've broken that cycle and we won't have those. So we can compost those on upper land areas and not have a problem with weed seed or propagative plant parts. Fish and meat, biosolids. I'll just take a minute with biosolids, and that is human manure. And I will talk more about that. So in the subsequent slides. So let me, I'll get to that when we get there. Dairy waste, milk wastes, liquids, we compost all kinds of stuff. This is just a list. I'll let you stare at it for a minute of all the types of all the types of feedstocks that people have asked us to help them compost. So fats, oils, and greases, milk and ice cream waste, off-spec pet food, different dusts, pits, stones, gummy vitamins, all kinds of things are asked for in these. So we just sort of put this list together so that people get an idea of what really is compostable. These slides will be available to you right along. So if Iowa decides to make them available to you, then they will be. Yeah. Something jumped up there. Okay. Potential for contamination. Okay, am I still in the meeting?
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
I got a funny message in here, so I just wanted to make sure. Potential for contamination. So we have these feedstocks and we're looking for as clean a feedstock as we can. These are some of the potential problems. So if we just spread raw manure without composting it, we may lose some of those nutrients. And you've probably talked about that in gardening and how we use things anyway. But we don't want those excess nutrients when we put manure down on the ground to run off into streams and to go into the groundwater and things like that. So when nutrients aren't properly taken care of, aren't properly bound with the carbon and nitrogen, we can have problems with runoff. Herbicides can be a problem. PFAS and PFOAs. So these are what we call the forever chemicals that you're probably hearing a little bit about. And these forever chemicals are pervasive in the environment. And they come from packaging waste. They come from firefighting foams. They are from dental floss that you use. That's a PFAS. The box board inside inside of your like a pizza box and things like that, has a spray on so things don't stick to it. One that we probably know a little bit more is the old Teflon and the nonstick coatings that cause some serious problems. And this material can get into our wastewater, absolutely. So we have a lot of it in our wastewater now, and that's where we're seeing most of it. But that's from shampoo, liquid soaps and shampoos and perm solutions and all kinds of stuff that has these chemicals in it, and they don't go away. They don't break down easily. So that's just something to keep in mind. Pesticides, I'll talk a little bit more about those and how they break down. Fungal versus bacterial. How do we want our compost? A lot of people will say, I want a fungal compost, a heavy fungal compost, or I want a bacterial compost. They're good for different things. My feeling on fungal versus bacterial is we really should have a very, very balanced material, and putting as many feedstocks, as many clean feedstocks into our compost will really set that habitat, create that habitat for all of those organisms to be able to function. Human pee, human urine. The NPK, look at the NPK for human urine. If you're used to your putting materials on your vegetables and stuff like that. I'm not telling you to put pee on your vegetables, but 20, 1.2, and 4. That's a lot of nutrients that are just going away someplace. So there are efforts to actually use human urine in composting and in gardening. So we're looking at that. There are some ways that it can be collected more easily than others. But I'm not going to get too far into that, except to say, look at the nitrogen in there. Okay. Okay. These are questions that you, when you're sourcing compost, these are questions that you might want to ask about what that material is. What are you actually putting on your land? Because you don't want to put bad things on there. What feedstocks are used to make the compost? Good one. Are any generated on farm? Which ones? Are pesticides and herbicides used? And I'll get into some of the details about these as we go through the different feedstocks. The PFOAs and PFAS. How long is material composted? By which methods? Is it passive? Is it active? Is it turned? These all tell us a little bit about all of this. In New York State, we actually regulate by process. So we need to know that we've reached time and temperature in those composts so that we have no weed seeds and that we don't have pathogens that are going to negatively affect us, make us sick. Is it screened or not screened? Has compost been tested? Are results available? So the testing that we might be doing, we might want to look at testing soil nutrients to see what we actually need from our organic matter or our compost or our fertilizer if we're using fertilizers. Organic material can have too much, like manure, like just putting dairy manure down. We might have too much that's not bound, so that could be a problem and it can run off. pH is an important thing also, knowing what your the pH of your compost is and the pH of your soil will allow you to balance that a little bit more so you can grow your vegetables and fruits. No crop requirements. So I'm going to go through different feedstocks, the main feedstocks that we might have, and talk about the problems with them. So leaf and yard waste, residuals, we can have garbage in them. So we might rake our leaves out to the curb and there may be manhole covers in them. There may be a dead animal in them. There might be any number of things. Glass is a problem. Pesticides and herbicides may have been sprayed on the leaves and the yard waste. And we have a particularly robust herbicide that can go right through the whole composting process, can go through an animal, can go through the composting process, can go through, can be applied to land and can kill some of your plants or give you really negative results because they're fine on grass again, but they're not fine on any of your broadleaf plants. And the two compounds there are clopyrrolid and aminopyrrolid. And these are compounds that are still out in the environment. They're sprayed on hay primarily to kill broadleaf weeds, and they are very robust. So you do have to think about those. We have outlawed them in the whole Northeast, I think even some of the Southeast, and some of the northern states in the center of the country. I don't know whether they are sprayed on hay crops and the like in Iowa. I don't think they've been outlawed in those areas. In the West, they're definitely Idaho, Montana, Idaho, Montana. They're definitely still using them and they are causing problems. Lead. So why would we have lead in leaf and yard waste? Leaded gasoline and lead paint that's been used on the roads for many years. We stopped using leaded gasoline and we've stopped using lead paints on roads. So that's going to go away. But if you were to, if your community was to suck up leaves with a vacuum truck, you might get more of that particulate matter and get more of the lead in that batch that was picked up that way. If it's picked up with a loader, then a lot of that particulate matter will just stay right on the asphalt. So salt levels also. A lot of states use road salts and we can have higher salt levels in our composts. Orchards. Okay, so all the food waste, all that kind of stuff is food waste is a good feedstock, but we have to watch out a little bit for food waste. It can be high in salt. It can have physical contaminants like ketchup packages and creamer containers and latex or nitrile gloves, things like that. Varies with feedstock. So it depends on whether it's food processing waste or food waste. This is just a test that we do for soil health. And I'm just putting this in front of you because this might be something that you would be reading to look at how your compost or your soil holds up in your gardens. And I won't read through this. It just gives you this information. Is it a sand, silt, and clay, and how much of each? What is the hardness? What is the aggregate stability, the organic matter? And these are tests that can be done at our lab, but there are a lot of other labs that can be doing tests like this. This happens to be a soil health lab specifically, and that's the results from that. This is just physical properties, and I'll let you go through this at another time because you read through it at another time. We have a fact sheet that has all of this information on it on our website, and you can read that information there, but it tells you what levels dairy and poultry manure actually have in all of these different things: moisture, density, nitrogen, all those kinds of things. And another page of that. Just put it in here so that you would have it in the long run. You are welcome to use slides that I have on here for master gardener training, master composter training information when you're out in the field. So manure compost. So what are the problems with manure compost? High in organic matter. Well, it depends on whether the compost is actually made on soil surface or cement or asphalt. When we make it on cement or asphalt, we actually get a topsoil blend. And that can be actually an asset if we have clean soil there. But the organic matter actually is lower because it's a topsoil blend. It's low in contaminants generally. We don't have a lot of contaminants there. Sharps, needles, things like that have been really removed from all our dairies and vet schools, manures, and all that kind of stuff. A lot of work has been done on that over the years. Little garbage. Generally, there's very little garbage unless if animals are, if cows are eating food waste, there may be a little bit more of the packaging waste and things like that in it. And some dairies are using, and dairies and beef are using wasted food that can go in, and they have depackaging units and everything, but it could have some waste in it. Can be high in phosphorus. That definitely can be a problem, especially with poultry manure in particular. That can be quite high in phosphorus. We really want to make sure that that is composted and then applied, or a lot of our our chicken manure is actually used straight up on vegetables, but it's used more like a fertilizer instead of a compost. We just want to sprinkle a little bit on when we're putting on a raw manure, raw poultry manure in particular. And pharmaceuticals. We don't have a lot of pharmaceuticals in manures, in dairy manures. We were worried about wormers in horse manure because we wanted to see if that was going to cause a problem with the microbes and other annelids and everything in the composting process. And what we found was that wormers, the continuous wormers or the daily or the periodic wormers, actually break down in about 6 days after it's in a compost pile. If it's not put in a compost pile, if it's just dropped out in the field, it doesn't go away quite as quickly. The compost process actually helps that. This is just some of the analytes from compost, and this was I think it's 7 or 8 dairy manures. I think everybody is dairy. There should be a poultry in there also. One of them is a poultry. And you can look, and the organic matter, take a look at that. The pHs, they're, 7.7, 7.8, 8.3, they're up there. Fecal coliform. And these are places that didn't finish the compost process. So we can see fecal coliform is really high there. And we really don't want that. With the finished compost and in these manures, we look over there for weed seed count, which is always important to gardeners. And because we have killed most of the weed seeds in the process, we don't have to worry about those. The one on the bottom says 98 weed seeds per liter of soil. That's a lot. And that particular pile had weeds growing on it that were taller than I was. And they propagated on the compost pile because it was a great nutrient rich place to grow. And so they had those. So you have to really make sure that your site, because you're making a rich compost, you really want to make sure that your site doesn't go to, none of the weeds go to seed, so that you don't have a lot of weed seed in your compost, because that's all blow-in, not the actual process. The process will kill most of the weed seeds. There's one particular weed seed that doesn't get killed as quickly, and we all eat it probably almost every day, and that is a tomato. And I can find tomatoes growing in compost all across the state. And I pick and eat them at the end too. Fats, oils, and meats. I said that I do a lot of mortality composting. It's probably 50% of the work that I do. And it is a good material. It's a good way to dispose of it. We also had are in right now, just at maybe at the end, maybe in the middle of a highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak. And I know you've had some breaks in Iowa. There are subject matter experts that go out to those farms that have 3.2 and 5 million birds that have to be disposed of. We go out and work with the farms to compost all of those. The eggs, the meat, the manure, and the feed all have to be managed. So that we have miles of piles in a lot of places of actually very good compost. We just have to let it go through the process. We kill the avian flu very quickly, but we want to make a product out of it, and the farmers need to make a product out of it so that they can distribute it to people that use that manure, those feedstocks. It's highest in nutrients. If I look at a fully composted meat waste, it's going to be about a 2-2-2, and most composts are a 1-1-1. Physical contaminants are generally very low, and use limitations, we don't really have much trouble with that. Use limitations are pretty low. When we are composting roadkill, we tend to use that wild animal compost right back on the side of the road. So those are the use limitations. We would use that roadkill compost right on back on the roadsides to not have to worry about anything, but we kill all the pathogens in it. So biosolids. This is the one that I, want to emphasize a little bit more. We can have a lot of problems with biosolids. And one reason that you may say, oh, I don't use any biosolids on my gardens. But if you go to any of the big box stores, you probably are using biosolids on some of your gardens, because there are a lot of the composts that are there are biosolids. Milorganite is one of them that you may hear of. It's supposed to deter deer from getting into your garden and things like that. So that's one of the ones that's marketed in a large way. But there are others, and that's Milwaukee's sludge or biosolids. So we want to be a little bit careful about what we're buying. I always encourage people, if they're going to buy in a big box store or garden center or something like that, to make sure that it's a manure compost, and make sure that that's a manure compost that can be used. Inerts, the small pieces of, anything. It can be plastics, it can be anything that's not degradable. Chemical contaminants, there are plenty of chemical contaminants, the PFOAs and PFAS that I mentioned, is also a problem. Bacteria, hold on, stop. Bacteria can be a problem because we have a lot of regrowth in bacteria. Viruses, generally not. Generally, those are wiped out pretty quickly by the first round of heat. Drugs, a lot of those do break down. And we've done work with our barbiturates that are used to euthanize horses, and those are, they break down pretty well all the way through that process. And so we don't have as much to worry about with that particular class. Antibiotics tend to break down pretty well. But it's a continuous feedstock. It does change through the year. It's everything that gets flushed down the toilet and goes down our sinks and all. And there are use limitations for it. There's Class A and Class B biosolids. So do be careful that you're at least getting Class A, but I would not use it. I'm just from a science end of things, I wouldn't use it on my food. Pathogens. And this is one of the things, they only have to pass tests for fecal coliform or salmonella, and none of the others are looked for in that. It does have to reach time and temperature. pH is generally okay, but there can be problems with pathogens in biosolids. We have compost maps in New York State, and there's maps across the country called Find a Composter. And our maps, I'll speak to our maps right now on the Cornell Waste Management Institute site. They're all different types of facilities. Colleges and universities, government, our prisons, 47 of our prisons compost their food waste. So there's a lot of different composts along with our farms and our commercial composters. So we have a map that's interactive. You can hit on those buttons and you can find out what types of composts they are, how they're processed, all that kind of stuff. Or where you might have a feedstock that might be able to be matched with a facility. And that's how these maps tend to work. Compost facility in New York City. I'm just showing you that one. This is one of the posters that Alicia was speaking about. Make it and use it in urban environments. So this does highlight some of the cities, but we have them for farms, we have them for erosion control, we have them for DOT, we have them for gardens, we have them for, we're putting one together for landscaping in cemeteries and for memorials. So that's another one that's going to be coming up in the next couple months. But they give you ideas of how to use it and what's being done. So take a look at those. Feel free to use them at festivals to get people, to encourage people to use compost. And when we use the compost, our carbon footprint is even better. We're kind of neutral when we compost it and when we compost it, but when we use it, we get 3 times more bang for our buck with our carbon emissions. I'm going to just go through a lot of different pictures right now of the ways that we're using compost. So just so we can get some more ideas, this was a trial with 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch fertilizer, no fertilizer. And we looked at all of that. Those reports are on our website, but looked at all of that, and you could see immediate green up when we put compost on those sites. It really helps us improve compacted soils. And this is, before and after. And we really don't want that rock hard stuff with lots of clay and all that. The organic matter actually helps us a lot to help to work with that. This is kind of a weird situation, and I'll just run you through it quickly. This was in an atrium, and it's at Cornell, actually. And there is no entrance into this atrium, like for a loader or anything like that. They actually had to lift them over the buildings. So it was interesting in that way. But what they did was they were landscaping this area, and they had run up and down, they had put compost down, and then they put topsoil on top of the compost. And this is what happened. They planted and everything, and then rain came, and all of it sloughed off. We can't take those layers. We want compost to be the top layer of materials, or especially on a slope, or we'll really have a problem with that slope. So doing it right is best. This is roadkill compost. The roadkill compost was put down at 3 inches, which made me very nervous because I thought that was way too much compost to put down. Then it was hydroseeded, and they also took some track machines and drove over that so that it was kind of compacted. And I think that's what saved things. This was done in November, and November, 4 months later, 5 months later, we had grass growing. It was beautiful. And I thought we'd kill the seed during the winter months. This is in New York State. We have serious winters, and we did really well. This is a slope, and it's in Texas, and it was down in 2002. They're spraying a blanket of compost on this slope, and it happens to be biosolids compost. It's on a roadside, low public contact areas, and then they seeded it down. They seeded it down, and 8 months later, they had grass growing, and the aquifers were in such bad shape in Texas that they had to get something growing on the roadsides. This is a roadside, another roadside. There's another one in Texas, and they were able to really get grass growing. They added the compost. The compost has that moisture holding capacity and the organic matter, and it works really well on roadsides and areas where we need to have vegetation so that we're not having the kinds of runoff that we are going to have problems with. This is a mitigated wetland, so they had landfilled it, and they decided to take the garbage out of there, and then they landscaped it with different established vegetation with different water type plants, bog type plants. We have compost socks. I talked about blankets a little bit just a bit ago, and we also have socks, and you may have seen them on your roadsides. We use them for erosion control, and we fill them with different types of carbon. It depends on what we want to do. We might fill them with compost, and I've seen that done. We had a refugee garden where they filled them with compost and they planted in them and had irrigation, and they made a tremendously gorgeous garden with that. We can also use wood chips and smaller stuff. We don't want to use really sawdust. That's not going to do very much for us, except plug up. But these will filter the water that's going in. We're putting another blanket down here on a roadside. And just so you see that. And then the socks are put down. The socks are put down so that they're keeping all of the material out of the riprap and holding that whole bank. That whole bridge had washed away, or a lot of the soil under the bridge had washed away. All this has been put back in, and we're getting vegetation growing. Actually, it's all done. This was a couple of years back, but this is a beautiful setup. This is, yes, you can think about construction in urban settings. We can't let runoff go down into our waterways and stuff because all the sediment blocks everything and causes pollution. So we can't do that. Just protecting that drain so that everything doesn't go down in there. Tree establishment. This is a really interesting study that was done. Yeah, that was done. So these trees were planted. These are 3 years of trees that were planted without amendment, and 3 years with amendment. I'll go backwards for you. Without amendment and with amendment. So you can jumpstart trees very well. Our tree specialists do a 50-50 backfill with trees, and it really makes a robust tree stand. Lots of compost in the tree hole. This was a horse that was composted, and they are memorializing it with planting a tree. A landscaping project. This one happened to be a 50-50, a split garden where we did half of the garden was mixed with poultry manure, and half of the garden was mixed with dairy manure. That was our funding sources, so that's what we were using. And this garden was put in there, and all the organic matter was pretty much all the soil was taken out. The organic matter was put back mixed 50-50 in these gardens. And we're at about 12 years out now. And these are beautiful gardens. Both dairy and poultry did well. And we've had 12 years out, we've had good, really high organic matter to the point where we don't have to add anything. Just another garden. This happens to be at a compost facility, and it's always good to show people what you can grow in it if you're trying to sell it. This is DOT roadside situations. This was another late fall situation. We put blankets in here, so we sprayed blankets along these, and we put socks in to keep all the crap on the road and not running into a class 1 stream below it. And this is how it looked. It was hydroseeded, and then we started growing grass in there and other short plantings. And this is how it looked by the next summer. So did really well, is holding things. Timing was poor, but again, it still worked. And this happens to be in the Ithaca area, so even colder. These are socks that are pinned in. You can see I didn't cut off the wooden posts yet so that nobody will hook themselves on them. But this was a stream that was coming across that lawn, and it was just kept eroding everything. So we put those socks in to stabilize. This is on the corner of where a stream is going underneath the road or a trickle is going underneath the road. And we put those in there to keep from, there's a telephone pole right up above those socks. And it was going to be compromised. So we've built the soil back up there and have safety. And that was 4 months later. So you can see everything was good in there and it all worked. This is one of the roadside dishes. And this was, we have a tendency to really dig them out too much. So these are chip socks and we put those in, and I'll just show you, there's a sock right down on the bottom of that picture. And you can see the post sticking up from there, but that's all working really well. That's all working really well. This is a ditch that's going into a class 1 stream. So we put an extra large sock in there and it works. It ended up working really well. A park setting, you can see the socks are up in here. This waterfall gets crazy and, you know, totally floods that whole area. So we put in things called quick sticks, shrubs that would take hold in that area so that it would stop eroding back. Eroding stream banks, you know, this is another shots of that. So we were working with that. We pin those in really with long stakes because erosion, water can move things everywhere. This is just a swale that we were working on to get water off the parking lot in this park. We're also doing some soil blends and soil mixes with New York City's, that shouldn't have gone, hold on, with New York City soils. We looked at compost to mineral soil mixes, 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 50, and 100%. And I'll just click through these. We're looking at different layering. We're looking at different things. This happens to be triticale growing in them. And you can see the 50-50s, which are all the way to the right, are, this thing has taken over. It's got a mind of its own. Okay. The ones over to the far right are, you know, by far the best, and they were the 50-50 mixes. So we're really very happy. Actually, the 100, this one, the one that's next to the green tube is actually 100% compost, and we didn't really think that it should be able to do that, but it by far was the best in the trial. Just some more pictures of top dressing soil in a different area, or turf in a different area. Got that. This is top dressing turf right on campus where grass never grows under those trees. And now we've got it growing under those trees. So roadsides, tree planting, and that's that. We want to make sure that we're recycling all our organic matter. In my dreams, if we could put 3 inches of compost over the whole terrestrial earth, I think we'd have way better soil, and things would be so much better.